Professor Alan Lichtman is the lead historian in predicting presidential elections, having called the last 9 of the 10 races correctly, including Donald Trump's astonishing 2016 election win over Hillary Clinton with his model 13 Keys to the White House. But who does the 13 Keys tracker predict will win the election? In today's video, we will find out. Now first, an introduction to this key model. Essentially, there are 13 keys as you can see here. There are descriptions to each and every key, and every key that is true is a key that goes to the incumbent party, in this case Joe Biden, and any key that is false is a key that goes to the challenger, in this case Donald Trump. If at least 8 keys are true, that means the incumbent is predicted to win re-election. And if at least 6 keys are false, that means Donald Trump, the challenger, is predicted to win their election. The keys system has at least a 90% success rate historically, so it should be a pretty accurate model. It predicted Trump's historic win in 2016. It did predict Biden's win in 2020, so we're going to get right into it. So starting off here with the first key, the midterm gain key. Democrats had a very good midterm in 2022. You can see that in the Senate, Democrats actually had a net gain of 1 seat. Generally speaking, in the midterms, the incumbent party always loses a couple seats, sometimes on the lower end of about 3, and sometimes on the higher end close to a dozen. However, Democrats retained several competitive races, including the state of New Hampshire by double digits. Maggie Hassan hang on by 10 points. Arizona, Mark Kelly hang on by 4. Nevada, Calvin Cortez Masto hang on by a fraction of 1%. And we saw that Raphael Warnock also did quite well. Democrats were also able to flip the state of Pennsylvania. So overall, it was a pretty good midterm for Democrats in the Senate and in the governor's races here, despite there being almost a dozen competitive races. Essentially, you see that the most competitive gubernatorial elections in 12 states, 9 of them held by Republican incumbents, Democratic incumbents, and only 3 held by Republicans. Democrats only lost a single race, being the state of Nevada, while they also gained back one in the state of Arizona. So overall, not a shabby midterm for the Democrats at all. They were expected to do a lot worse. And in the House, Democrats also only lost about 10 seats, and they were able to gain several seats they were not expected to gain. For example, Greg Landsmine's seat right now against Steve Chabot. Landsmine won by 16,000 votes. That's pretty impressive. Gabe Vasquez also defeated Yvette Harrell, for example. So Democrats certainly did gain a couple of seats. They also made the Colorado's 3rd district with Lauren Boebert surprisingly competitive. So not at all a shabby midterm for Democrats in 2022. However, if you look at the description of the midterm gain key, it's that the incumbent party holds more seats in the United States House of Representatives than after the previous midterm election. In 2018, Democrats held about 232 seats, and now in 2022, Democrats only hold 213 seats. Although again, I said that essentially that Democrats did pretty well in the midterms, this key is false based on definition. However, it doesn't really say much because this key is pretty much always false, just because voters generally want to vote against the incumbent party and vote for something that's quote unquote change over much of the same, and therefore this key generally always is just false because people are frustrated with the incumbent administration, and therefore it doesn't really indicate much. But this is the first key of 6 required for Donald Trump to win the election. Key number 2 is no primary contest. We know that there is a primary contest, obviously, and there were some delegates going to other candidates such as Maureen Williamson, Dean Phillips, and also quote-unquote other candidates, generally uncommitted. Uncommitted has received a combined total of close to 10% of the vote. But if you look at some isolated cases here, for example, in Minnesota, Joe Biden only got 70% of the vote here. In the state of Hawaii, Democrats also did not do great there. Joe Biden only got 66% of the vote there, with uncommitted getting close to 30%, although again, turnout was extremely low. You look at those numbers, it's not great news for the Democratic incumbent. However, again, by definition, this is a key that almost certainly goes to the Democratic Party or generally the incumbent party. As long as the incumbent gets 2/3 of the delegates, they end up winning this key. In this case, you can clearly see that Joe Biden is clearly over 2/3 of the delegates. Now, one of the cases that this key did not end up going for the incumbent party here was back in I believe it was back in around, 1992, I believe. George H.W. Bush had a very staunch primary challenger who took away more than a third of the delegates. This key was false, and essentially H.W. Bush lost the election in close to a landslide. But anyways, this key is true for Joe Biden. The third key here, incumbent seeking re-election. It's true, although Biden realistically might not even last till the midterm because his mental health is in decline. However, it's looking still very likely that Biden will be the Democratic candidate, assuming nothing shocking ends up occurring. Now, the key number 4 here, no third party. Now, essentially, by definition, this is a key that could end up going either way. If there is a third party candidate likely to win more than 5% of the vote, again, this key becomes false. Essentially, if a third-party candidate is able to grab 5% of the vote, this key goes to Trump. If not, this key goes to Biden. The reason this key is worded this way is generally because if there is a larger third-party presence, it generally indicates that voters are frustrated with the two options, specifically with the incumbent, and therefore a challenger is more likely to win. Now, this key is definitely in fierce debate. Right now, if you look at the polling aggregate in the three-way race between Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and RFK Jr. RFK Jr. is the only third party that could get above 5% of the vote. What we're seeing right now is that, again, Kennedy is polling above 5%. So currently, according to polling, Kennedy would end up giving this key to Donald Trump. However, there's also a problem with that. The fact is, Kennedy's support has definitely declined significantly. When this polling aggregate was first released, this is Decision Desk HQ/The Hill. When it was first released, Kennedy had 16.5% support. In fact, at one point he had 19%, and he has sharply declined. For example, to December 1st of 2023, you can see that Kennedy was already down to 12%. By February the 1st, he was down to 8%, right? And by about June 1st, he was down to about 8.6, and now he's down to 7.1. And we're seeing recent polls here that suggest that Kennedy could be under 5%, and he did not qualify for the debates. Generally, third-party candidates go sleep as pretty quickly downhill when we approach the election, when voters realize Joe Biden, Donald Trump, the only two candidates that are likely to win pretty much any of the electoral college votes or a significant share of the popular vote. Now, one of the times that this key went false was again in the 1992 election, where Ross Perot took away a substantial amount of the vote, and again in 1996, where Ross Perot got more than 5% of the vote. Right now, if I was to predict how much of the vote RFK would get, I'd say right around 5%. So it definitely could go either way. Right now, I'm actually going to say this key leans false, because of the fact that, again, RFK is polling quite well, and I do see that he has quite a few supporters who are willing to rally behind him. But to be honest, I personally don't take RFK Jr. very seriously, so this key could definitely go either way. Liquid says this key leads true, but essentially I could definitely agree that it's pretty close to a coin flip or 50-50. The next key here is strong short-term economy. The economy, according to voters' minds, again, is not particularly strong. I'm just going to pull it up here. Again, only about 28% of Americans approve of the current economy. However, the definition of, quote, strong short-term economy is that there's no recession. And essentially, if you look at the source here, it will tell you that the past 2 quarters or past 4 or 5 quarters have all been positive GDP growth, which means that this key does go likely to the Democratic Party. Things could change, but it's looking unlikely that, according to that statistic, that the U.S. will be in a recession. 2020, this key was false as there was coronavirus, but in this election, this key will be true. Key number 6, strong long-term economy. Now, if you just look at essentially the GDP growth statistics, it wasn't the best in 2022 or 2023. It was narrowly under pretty much the 2012 to 2018 numbers. However, in 2020, the statistic is pretty much dragged down by coronavirus. We saw a significant dip in GDP per capita growth, and when you average it out, it does suggest that in this particular term, the GDP growth has been on average higher than the two previous terms, and therefore this key is in the likely blue column. Things could change, but I doubt that would happen. Key number 7, major policy change. I'm just going to look at the PolitiFact website, where essentially it says Biden's promise tracker scorecard: 28% capped, 28% stalled, 3% broken, 9% compromised, 28% in the works. When you add up everything, essentially what we're going to get here is that Biden did get some things done, for the better, for the worse. That's up to you, but he did get some things done, right? A lot of these promises were COVID-19. If you look at it, for example, um, we're just gonna see get COVID-19 out of on control, 100 billion vaccinations, etc. But he definitely made some policy changes. After all, his predecessor was Donald Trump, and the two of them could not disagree more on the issues. And therefore, I'm gonna give this key to Joe Biden again, because again, Joe Biden and Donald Trump certainly does not see eye to eye with each other. Now, so far, so good for President Biden, as 5 keys have already went true and 2 have been false, and one of them is quite shaky right now. Now, key number 8, no social unrest. Now, this one is a bit complicated. What we're seeing in the Israel-Hamas war right now is that there has been social unrest, right? There has been about 2,600 events, 442 in support of Israel, and 2,100 in support of Palestine. You can see all these protests and rallies essentially. Now, this is hurting President Biden, obviously, because it's under his watch and people are deeply divided about this issue. If you want to look at the analysis by CNN, a Democratic leaning source, Biden's young voter problem keeps getting worse because young voters are those ones that support Palestine, and Joe Biden is going for his support for Israel, and he's vouching for them, and that is the thing, right? And these types of protests, they're really hurting Biden, especially with the youth vote, the group of voters in which Biden is supposed to end up winning. Nevertheless, here it is difficult to say is there's going to be social unrest until the November election. It has to be sustained or leaves critical issues unresolved by the time of the election. Personally, I think that will happen. I think the Israel-Hamas war, just based on what happened again with the Russian-Ukraine war, we're seeing that the wars can go on for a long time without a resolution. Now, Biden might try to get a resolution, as Democrats have tried to, because that would help Biden's chances at winning the presidency, as previously mentioned. But right now, I'm going to say that the social unrest issue will probably drag on to November election. Lichtman says this key still leans true, which means that he believes that the nation will not come apart and that essentially widespread violent acts will not continue. Right now, I slightly disagree. Again, this is a shaky key, which is why it's only in the lean category, but right now it still leans false. Key number 9, no scandal. There was one scandal with Hunter Biden's laptop. Hunter Biden, which is Joe Biden's son, was found guilty of 3 felony cases, and he could be sentenced to up to 25 years in prison and face a $750,000 penalty for those 3 felonies. About lying. It was relatively a clear and cut case in my opinion, but it does not count as a serious scandal. Again, a serious scandal would be something like the Monica Lewinsky trial for Bill Clinton, or something like Trump's impeachment trial. Those are considered major scandals because it directly affects the president, and right now it just does not seem that there will be a major scandal, and currently there is no major scandal, so it is a true key for President Biden. Number 9, no foreign military failure. Now, there have been several failures. Right now, on the aggregate here, true has 6 keys, false has 3 keys. Trump needs to win 3 of these keys, while Biden only needs to win 2. Now, we see no foreign or military failure. Now, there have been 2 instances where you can argue there was a foreign or military failure. The first was in Afghanistan back in early 2021, where troops essentially withdrawn from a 14-month period, or about 18 months, pretty much all withdrawn by August the 30th of 2021. That really hurt Biden's approval rating. If you want to look at this graph, right around that period of time, Biden's approval has been slipping because of that reason. And essentially, many people disapproved of his handling. Personally, I'm not sure if that qualifies for a major scandal, because someone was gonna still have to do it. Our president had to essentially withdraw the troops, and it really wasn't all Biden's fault. But still, that was not something that looked too positively for the United States. Essentially, it was going to be a failure either way, regardless who was in charge. But regardless, it was not something that looked good for President Biden. The second thing is again the Israel-Palestine war, and this time I think it's more obvious that this is a failure, just based on how much it has hindered Biden's ability to attract young voters. Essentially, it is a pretty detrimental thing for President Biden, and I would say that at this point in time, the key is definitely leaning towards false. Now, key 11, major foreign military success. Realistically, I have not seen any foreign or military successes committed by President Biden. Really, there has been nothing, but there could be one thing that could count as a foreign or military success if Russia ends up losing against Ukraine in the Russia Ukraine war, or essentially, if there's any type of resolution, Democrats could spin it as a victory, especially as an October surprise that could help Biden's chances. But as of right now, A, I don't think that will happen, and B, I don't consider that a foreign or military success either. And right now, it's certainly still in the likely Republican column. Key number 12, charismatic incumbent. Really, historically, there have been only a few charismatic incumbents or charismatic challengers. Ronald Reagan was one of them back in 1980. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was one of them back in 1932. But historically, there have been very few people or single political parties who have been able to garner both keys. Generally, it's that the incumbent is not charismatic, and then the challengers also are uncharismatic. First, let's go to key 12. Charismatic incumbent. Biden does not resemble a charismatic incumbent. There's definitely times where he slips his mouth and he does not remember where he is, or there's sometimes where he's unable to remember his birthday or his son's birthday, and that essentially is a problem. And he's like the most uncharismatic incumbent the US has seen in quite a few decades, if not its entire existence. So that is certainly going to be false here. And now, uncharismatic challenger. I would not consider, again, some people could argue that Trump is charismatic. He's able to communicate pretty effectively to his supporters and essentially those who are devoted to him. However, I have a problem with arguing that he is charismatic. The thing is that he still has a negative 12.2% approval rating net overall. And essentially, if you want to be counted as charismatic, at least you need to have a favorable approval rating, right? So right now, I'm going to put Trump as well as an charismatic challenger, which does right now leave Biden with 7 keys, Trump with 6. However, if you look at the rubric here, 8 keys are needed to be true for Biden to win, and 6 keys are needed for Trump to win as false. So Trump does win here, according to my way of filling in the map. However, Professor Alec Lichtman has a different take. He does currently predict that Joe Biden will win the election, and he says, quote, that there will have to be a lot of things that go wrong for Biden for him to lose the election. It really comes down to these 2 keys here. Key number 4, no third party, and key number 8, no social unrest. Again, those 2 keys are pretty wobbly at this moment in time. I am still predicting a Trump win, not only based on this, but also based on the Electoral College map. However, again, based on this at least, the election is going to come down to a nail biter. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.